Welcome, welcome, welcome back, my Be Health Empowered family. Thank you so much for joining us here on Excuse Me, Doctor. I, of course, am Dr. Melissa Clark. I'm here with you every week. Please call me Dr. Mel. We bring you Excuse Me, Doctor specifically so that you can have the health information that you need to make empowered health decisions for yourself, your family, and even your community. So thank you so much for tuning in, whether you're listening on Facebook, whether you're listening on YouTube, whether you're joining us on HUR XM 141, HUR Voices XM 141. Regardless of where you're joining us, thanks for tuning in. If you're on social media, though, please hit us on YouTube with a subscribe and on Facebook with a like. I really, really, really appreciate you for that. And of course, I really want you to put those questions in the chat. Questions, comments. We want to hear from you. That's the whole reason why we're here, is to make sure that you are part of our discussion with whatever we're covering. So let's just get right into it. And of course, I have to have my fantastic co-host tonight with me, Mr. Wayne Bruce.
Hey, Wayne. Where's my applause? Where's the applause, folks?
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Me holding it down tonight, folks. It's just me holding it down.
Yeah. We gotta somehow make it without Bria tonight. But
we're gonna make it without her.
Yeah. But it's gonna be good though. It's gonna be good. And we're sending her a shout out wherever she is.
Sending her a shout out. Dr. Mel, tonight's show, I'm excited. I'm excited every show, right?
Yeah.
Every show I'm excited, but I'm excited to be supportive tonight.
Okay.
I'm like a true supporter. I mean, I'm so supportive that I got on my supportive hoodie tonight.
And so whatever that hoodie means, I don't know, but we are talking about what does it mean?
It's a comfort hoodie.
Okay,
it's for comforting. We're going to talk about some things, some issues with women, but yes. I'm here to comfort you guys, and also to make sure that everybody in our listening audience can get their questions in. So
absolutely, as you always do, bringing the word in from the street. So
that's what I do.
Yeah, and tonight you kind of alluded to it, but we're talking about women and the specific effects of alcohol on women, which don't really get talked about a whole lot. I mean, we hear about a little wine is good for the stomach. Does that really mean everybody? I don't know. Is drinking different for men and women?
Right.
We got wine clubs. We got moms who wind down. We got Hoda and Jenna on the Today Show
in the morning. They're on at 10 o'clock. They're on at 10 o'clock with drinks.
Exactly.
Or talking about
even earlier in the other time zones. So yeah, I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, for you guys, is for women, that is, it is set up for you to kind of drink more. I mean, guys, we drink around events and we'll go out and say, let's have a drink. But we don't have
you don't have wine clubs?
We don't have wine clubs. It's not many when let's go to the wine club event just for men.
Well, we're gonna cover, is it harmless fun, right? Or are there some things that we also need to know about the health effects specifically for women? So we're gonna cover that tonight. We have an incredible guest who wrote a book called On the Rock, Straight Talk about women and alcohol. So we're going to be bringing her on later on in the show. So stay tuned and share with all the women who you think should have this information.
Share the episode, folks. This is going to be good. And whether you're a man or a woman, everybody can gain something from the knowledge of our guest this evening. So,
absolutely.
Dr. It's going to be good. Come on here and do her thing. But before she does, we have to recap the top news in health and wellness.
There we go.
With the recap. With the recap. There we go.
There we go. I knew we were going to get our graphic up. There we go.
Everything. Dr. Mel, this is the first recap that does not include COVID.
Because Bria's not here.
Bria's not here. Why? We don't even want to say why. But look, I'm excited because we're talking about overall wellness, and everybody's dropping weight, and I've dropped a few.
You have,
30
I think.
to be exact. But I've dropped
But who's
a few.
counting?
But who's
No,
counting?
that is wonderful. Let me just say that is fantastic.
I mean, it's what we do. We drop weight. Anyway, but here's the deal. I got a sweetener the other day, and it said monk fruit with this other sweetener. I thought it was great and been using it, and then this comes out. I couldn't even pronounce it. You had to pronounce it for me.
Erythritol.
It's erythritol.
Yes.
And
yes.
So erythritol or no?
So maybe it's not so good. So this is the deal. Okay. So that's the name of the artificial sweetener. It's in a bunch of sugar-free, low-cal products like sodas, ice cream, and health drinks because it does not raise your blood sugar, right? I don't know if you've seen buy antioxidant drinks like in Whole Foods and stuff like that. That's one of the prominent brand it's in. And our body actually produces it in small amounts. It's a sugar alcohol or a sugar alcohol sugar, right? But it's being added to processed foods 1,000 times higher volumes than it's made in our body, right?
Wow.
And it turns out that huge amount is not so good. It seems like studies are showing that it's associated with a higher risk of heart attack, stroke, blood clotting, and death. So not good news for it.
We can't even lose weight without the fear of blood clotting, stroke, and death. I mean,
well,
what are we going to come to? I mean,
I think, you mentioned monk fruit. Monk fruit is a naturally occurring, it comes from a fruit, and it also does not raise blood sugar. It's not manufactured in a lab. So, one thing I did was I just, got rid of the monk fruit with the erythritol and just stuck with the monk fruit, right?
Right.
Or instead of stevia, with the erythritol, just stick with the stevia. So, those are some other options.
So what you're saying in essence that it's more important to read the labels of anything.
Exactly. Read the labels. If it has artificial sweetener in it, I'd probably stay away from it until more research comes out showing that it is safe, right?
Okay.
Because there hasn't really been these long-term studies and this information is just kind of coming out. So probably a good idea to stay away from it for now.
Okay. So look, is real sugar better? That's what everybody wants to know. Is real sugar better for you than the erythritols or the different substances?
Yeah.
Sucralose and those things.
It depends where the sugar's coming from. That's the honest answer. So study shows that free sugar, so sugar that you add, from the packet or whatever, added sugars or sugars that are in fruit juice, syrups, and honey, those are not good for you. They are also linked with a higher risk of heart disease and stroke. Okay. But if you consume the same amount of calories from carbohydrates that are not free sugars, so that's sugars that occur naturally in fruit. So if you eat the whole fruit and not the fruit juice, if they're in vegetables like sweet potatoes, grains like brown rice, dairy products like milk, you get the exact opposite effect. You get less heart disease and stroke. And that's because of the fiber in the food that slows down the absorption of sugar and allows it to pass through your body more easily and not give your body these sugar spikes. So, basically, don't add sugar in. If you're going to get your sugar, get it from the food that you eat, and don't drink it either in fruit juice.
You see this face?
I do. It doesn't look like a happy face. It does not look like a happy
disappointment. Disappointment.
Yeah.
Struggle.
Yeah.
I can't. Basically, you have to drink water.
Yeah.
And that's it. Water.
Yeah. water is the best drink of all. It is. And we are 70% water. So we should constantly be trying to replenish the water in our body.
So it seems so. Let's keep down the road because yes, I'm speechless for the first time. I'm
I think that,
speechless for the first time, and I'm
yeah,
gonna give it up to my sister Pam. Pam in the audience. She says Wayne is speechless for the first time. I am
right. First time ever.
ever. I'm not doing well here. So
Well,
let's go. Let's go. We're steaming down the same road. Like,
uh-huh.
so the great thing is
Hmm.
cutting calories can help you with the rate we age. Is that true?
Yeah, there's a new study that showed that cutting calories by 25% slowed down the pace of aging in young and middle-aged adults. So starting early, um, by a few percentage points, like 2 to 3%. But actually, previous work shows that that 2 to 3% slower aging actually is associated with a 10 to 15% lower risk of dying over about a 10-year period. So that's pretty significant. And
Right.
it's the first time they've actually shown this in humans. They've shown it in animal studies before.
Mhm.
Um, so we know more research is needed, but we know that one way that people are already cutting calories is through intermittent fasting. So you know all about that, right?
Hey, start at noon. Breakfast.
Okay.
That whole thing. So they're saying the whole thing about breakfast is the most important meal of the day was really started by Kellogg's to get you to eat
Right.
their cornflakes.
Yeah. Yeah. Ain't that
I'm not
something?
saying you didn't hear from me.
It's all about money in the land of milk and honey.
Hey, and you brought up honey. See, I can't even eat
Yeah.
honey anymore.
I'm
No,
sorry. I'm
Dr. Mel.
sorry.
So yeah,
But
we try
you
to
eat
limit.
breakfast at you eat your first meal of the day at 12,
Yeah,
and that's one way that you've lost weight, right? You time limit the when you can eat during the day, and that
right,
automatically cuts calories
right,
because you're only eating in certain times, and
right.
that's been pretty effective for a lot of people.
Well, not for not for the entire United States because we have we're number one. We're number one, Dr. Mel. We're number
Yeah.
one as the unhealthiest, wealthy nation on earth.
And
How's it feel to be number one?
this is not a medal that we want, right?
Right.
So this was a study done by the Commonwealth Foundation. It showed that the US spends dramatically more on healthcare than any other high income nation, but we have the worst health outcomes by nearly every metric. It's ridiculous.
Wow. So people just can't afford healthcare, I guess, in the United States. Does that guarantee? But health coverage doesn't guarantee good health, does it?
It doesn't, but we're the only ones who don't provide universal access to healthcare
Okay.
of these high income nations. And so what's basically happening is we're living shorter, less healthier lives without people actually accessing the healthcare system when they need it. Um, and for example, we have the fewest annual healthcare visits. 30%, so 1 in 3 people have 2 or more chronic diseases. We have the worst rates for life expectancy, avoidable deaths, infant and maternal mortality, and chronic diseases like obesity.
So what can be done? What can we do?
Yeah. Well, it's a policy issue on one level, like things that increase access to healthcare, things that improve our environment, and our living conditions, investing in health equity and social services, and things that we know lead to a healthier population. It's deciding to spend our money in that way as opposed to on end of life care and lots of money, at the end of life, spend it more at the beginning of life to give people more healthier, more options, more opportunities
Mhm.
to stay healthy throughout their lifetime.
Wow, that's great advice. I mean, because Americans will spend on a funeral. You'll go in
Yeah,
debt. Americans will go in debt on funeral costs,
yeah,
but won't
that's
spend
true.
on their health to have
Right.
a beautiful life while you're here.
Yeah.
So let's lose the number one. I mean, I like being first, but not there.
Yeah. Not for that. Yeah,
Not for that.
definitely not
Not
for
for
that.
that. So you do know what time it is, right? You do know.
No, remind me.
The weekly debunk.
It's debunk time.
Stopping misinformation in its tracks.
So we're going to bring up one of the Twitter Finger members, Taylor Twitter Finger. She's younger. She says, she hit me up. She says, my friend who is pregnant posted a living will on TikTok, because Taylor uses TikTok, begging doctors, if there are complications during childbirth, save me before the baby. She said, is that necessary? She wanted me to ask you that. I said, I don't know. Let me ask the doctor.
Apparently there's just been this big wave of people posting these living wills on TikTok that say that. And it's not really necessary to post that, because it rarely ever comes down to, saving the mother over the baby and vice versa. That happens a lot in the movies or on soap operas, but not really so much in real life. There might be a need to do an emergency C-section, for example, to help the baby if the baby gets in distress or there's difficulty during the birthing process, or the mom might need an emergency hysterectomy, removal of the uterus if there's excessive bleeding. But it rarely happens that it's like choosing the mom over the baby. But let's talk about why women are feeling the need to post this. In states that have restrictive abortion laws, some women are fearful that doctors are going to prioritize the life of the baby over their unborn, over them in a medical emergency. And we know that, more than a dozen states, mainly in the South and the Midwest, have banned or severely restricted access to abortions following the Supreme Court's decision about 8 months ago or so now to strike down Roe versus Wade and basically leave it up to the states. So we know that pregnancy is not a harmless condition, and the risk of death has been increasing in the past few years, and the risk of complications. It's been happening the fastest among African American moms. We know that, who are dying at 3 times the rate of white moms. And the pandemic actually accelerated the number of Hispanic moms who now previously were on par around the rate that white pregnant moms died. But that's been accelerated by the pandemic differentially for Hispanic moms. So, people have these fears, and that's, I think, the reason why they're posting these living wills. But know that they're not, that they're not necessary. It's more important to develop a great relationship with your doctor, keep your prenatal care appointments, focus on healthy eating before you even get pregnant, and maintain that during your pregnancy. We talked all last week, right, about doulas, and the great role that they are playing now. So there are lots of different things that you can do to enhance your opportunity for a healthy pregnancy. Far and away, most pregnancies are healthy. So, it's no need to post the living wills.
Wow. So Taylor, stay off TikTok. No need.
No need to do that. She could be on that for other reasons, but
okay.
Well,
All right,
thank
Dr.
you.
Mel.
All right, we'll see you back in a little bit. We are going to move into our show for tonight. So, we've seen the movies Girls Trip, Girls Night, Sex in the City that associate women drinking alcohol and make it sort of normalized. But are there health concerns that we as women should be aware of when it comes to drinking? Well, as part of our Women's History Month empowerment series for the month of March, it is Women's History Month. We are going to be talking tonight with Dr. Susan D Stewart, who is the author of On the Rocks, Straight Talk About Women and Drinking. She is a professor of sociology at Iowa State University, and she focuses in her research on gender, families, and women's health. And she's written numerous articles and books, including the one that you just saw. So welcome, Dr. Stewart. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Absolutely. And I should mention you were on Dr. Phil recently, right?
I was. It was on January 10th.
All right. Yeah. Well, let's jump right into it. Tell us about the trends that we're seeing when it comes to alcohol consumption in America, especially as it pertains to women?
Okay. So about 2/3 of the population currently drinks alcohol. Men's use of alcohol has remained pretty stable over the last decades, but it's women's use of alcohol that has been increasing. So now their levels of alcohol use have converged largely. So women are only like 9 percentage points less in terms of, do they currently drink alcohol or not? Or I think it's, did you drink alcohol in the last 30 days?
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's good to know. And it kind of, you mentioned women's alcohol consumption has been going up. What are some of the factors that are associated with that? I think I alluded to some of it when I talked about, kind of in the media, the sort of the normalization of alcohol consumption for women. But are there other factors too?
Yeah. It's sort of akin to smoking in the 60s and 70s. As women move into male spaces, they tend to adopt, unfortunately, the poor health behaviors of men. And I think it's kind of like trying to be one of the boys, or, work actually involves a lot of alcohol in many industries. So there's that. There's also this normalization of alcohol. We see it everywhere. You go to yoga class and there's a yoga and wine. I just saw this in my own town. Yoga and wine. And the movies and the marketing. I mean, if you go to the grocery store, you see just shelves and shelves of alcohol directly marketed to women with the fancy labels and the names, the middle sister and the mad housewife and those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't heard of that one, the Mad Housewife. That's a new one. Yeah. Well, with women also, during the pandemic, staying at home, you mentioned the workplace culture, but did the pandemic also affect alcohol consumption patterns as well?
Absolutely. So everyone's drinking more. And we don't yet know whether it's going to level off and then decline and go back to pre-pandemic levels. It doesn't look like it yet. So for both men and women, and more alcohol is being consumed in the home and during the day. And women generally are the ones that consume alcohol in the home.
Okay, interesting. So, kind of to Wayne's point earlier, I think he mentioned men don't have wine clubs. So if we're talking about, this increase in alcohol consumption among women, what's the harm? I mean, the Bible says a little wine is good for the stomach, right? What's the big deal? Why did you write the book about straight talk about women and alcohol?
Yeah. Why I wrote the book, in my demographic, there's a lot of drinking. And we have kids and we go to book club, and, then you see these movies. And if you're on Facebook and you're part of these moms groups and things, there's lots of memes kind of making light of alcohol use. Or you go to the store and greeting cards and dish towels and signs we put on your wall. And I was like, as a sociologist, what is going on? Because then when you look at the data, you see increased deaths among women to cirrhosis and alcohol-related liver disease. We've seen a leveling off of life expectancy of men and women, and that is in part due to alcohol. Alcohol contributes to car accidents and suicides and opioid overdoses, and it's associated with child neglect and abuse, in addition to the negative health effects on women themselves in terms of increasing risks, like heart disease, cancer, stroke, like all of those things, obesity, and depression.
Yeah. So, and you said cancer, specifically breast cancer too, right?
That's right. And you know what gets me is some of these wine companies, they will market themselves as, with pink ribbons and things, even though there's a direct link between alcohol consumption, heavier alcohol consumption, and breast cancer.
So is there a safe amount of alcohol to drink? Like, what are the is it clear that research is saying, absolutely no alcohol at all, or are there some gradations that we should be aware of?
Yeah. So I would never want to tell anybody, any woman, not to drink alcohol, because there are studies that show, moderate levels of alcohol is on occasion is okay. But what we're seeing is that women are not drinking that way as much as they used to. They are drinking heavier, greater amounts of alcohol that sort of are trending toward the problematic types of alcohol use.
And what are the differences between men and women in terms of, how our bodies process alcohol and what the amount of alcohol that's considered a minimal amount versus a excessive amount?
Yeah, well, you're the doctor, but what I know or read is that women absorb alcohol differently than men, and it has a more negative effect, even controlling for weight. And women's hormones can influence the absorption of alcohol. So what might be okay one week is not necessarily going to be okay or have the same effect the next week. And so to just tell somebody, okay, you can only have 1 to 2 drinks 3 times a week or whatever, I wouldn't want to say, okay, that's okay for the rest of your life. I mean, there's aging, there's other health conditions that can play a role as well.
Yeah. So, in other words, there's been more research done on men in terms of what defines a safe drink, whereas for women, because of hormonal fluctuations, age, etc., it's unclear exactly, right? Is one thing that you're saying, and women's bodies. You said I'm the doctor, so I'll throw this in. So we have an enzyme in our stomach that helps to break down alcohol, as we drink it. And men have more of that enzyme statistically than women do, and so they break down alcohol more quickly in their body, and so become intoxicated at a slower rate than women do. That's another difference as well. So are there specific triggers or pressures that have been influencing women's drinking patterns over time? I mean, we mentioned the pandemic, but are there others?
Yeah, definitely the stress of managing a work life and a family life. So I think we all know that men have not caught up to women in terms of doing housework and doing childcare. And even during the pandemic, women who were working from the home still did the majority of the housework and the childcare, even when her husband or partner was there as well. And so studies have shown, including my own research, that the more stressed out, basically, a mom is, the more likely that she will drink alcohol. And with COVID, the more likely that she will have increased her alcohol since COVID, her alcohol consumption, the higher the stress on her because of her work and family.
Yeah. And you mentioned childcare. There's also, that sandwich generation phenomena of taking care of your children at the same time as you're taking care maybe of aging parents as well. And that's, I think, another stressor that women become caregivers at a greater rate than men. Not to say men don't, of course they do, but just the numbers and the tendency is for that to fall on women in most families. So how would you define, a lot of people say, and you mentioned, a drink here and there. How do you define a social drinker? Because I think your book talked a little bit about, what is social drinking?
Right. So I interviewed 32 women about these concepts. So what is an alcoholic? What is what is a binge drinker? What is a social drinker? And
Right.
they had these themes in common. So a social drinker, you drink occasionally, you drink one or two, you drink out with friends, never alone. It's not the main focus of the activity, and it's not a problem. But when I looked at the data that the women provided about their own drinking habits, about 50% had, uh, based on this criteria, evidence of a mild to moderate alcohol use disorder. So that they checked some of those items on, did you ever try to stop drinking but found that you couldn't? Is drinking getting in the way of your family relationships or your work? Do you feel hungover? Like those sorts of criteria. So everyone thinks they're a social drinker. They all describe themselves as social drinkers.
Yeah.
But the data suggests otherwise. And I think that's probably the case on a broader level.
Yeah. And I think, that that's a really important principle which you bring up in terms of the questions that you ask, because any substance that where it impedes your ability to function and your relationships really is what defines that you have a disorder. So whether that's food, right? If you're eating to the point where it's making you sick and what you're eating is making you sick, or if it's alcohol, or if it's nicotine, or opioids, whatever it is, if your use of it is making you impaired in some way in your relationships, your work, your home life, then that's when you really have to stop and say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't really working for me.
Correct. And if you think about family life, so I study families, a quarter of all families with children are single mothers. And so then
Wow.
you think about, wow, women using alcohol to manage stress, which is higher among single moms. Yeah. And so what I found too is that single mothers in particular had a lot of mitigating strategies to minimize the harm. So they would drink only after their kids were put to bed, or only out with friends and never at home. And so I'm still seeing mothers putting their children ahead of their drinking, at least in the sample that I interviewed. So
Oh, that's good news.
yeah.
So, so one of the areas of research cited in your book that was that women who feel discriminated against are more likely to consume alcohol. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So there are significant racial and ethnic differences in alcohol consumption, with white women, especially midlife and older white women, drinking the most alcohol, and much less alcohol consumption among African Americans and Asians and Hispanics, with the only group being similar to whites being Native Americans. And so I forgot your question. What was it?
Well, I just wanted you to expand on, you said that women who feel discriminated against are more likely to consume alcohol. I wanted you to expound on that.
Yeah. And so studies of African Americans in particular, those women who said they felt discriminated against or experienced microaggressions, like they felt uncomfortable in a situation or they weren't treated fairly, those women had higher levels of alcohol consumption, controlling for other factors like their age and their income and things like that. And incidentally, the LGBTQ plus population also has higher levels of alcohol consumption kind of at baseline, but that same effect of microaggressions you see in that population as well.
And it kind of makes sense based upon what we talked about before, that, when you feel under stress, a lot of times the association has been made that, well, if I feel stressed, that's the time when I should have a drink because it'll help calm me down. It'll help me sleep. It'll help my anxiety. It'll help me cope better. And unfortunately, that's the association that's been made. But I know specifically with sleep, it actually disrupts sleep. That's, I think, a pretty common myth that I probably should do a debunk on one day, right? But but yeah, and so that's not a surprise. You also noted, though, that deaths due to alcohol have increased by 130%, which blew me away for white women, but it's actually decreased by 27% for Black women. What would you attribute that to?
Yeah, that's so interesting. Well, the results don't control for level of education. So in
Mhm.
some other research I've done, once you control for that, you see that African American women who have a bachelor's degree or higher have about the same levels of drinking as do white women with a bachelor's
Mhm.
degree or higher. Um, so I can't necessarily pick apart the decline for amongst African Americans and other people of color, because as you mentioned earlier, their levels of education are going up.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I don't have the answer to that question. I do know that there are lots of stereotypes of poor women, women of color as drinking, doing drugs, and they have much lower levels of alcohol consumption than other
Mhm.
women. And so I think that's
Which is
surprising
interesting.
people. Like,
Yeah, that goes
what happened there?
exactly, and which I think is important because the research goes against the stereotype, which is very key, I think. And one other thing that I just heard you say is that when you're under stress, you know, uh, the income level and the educational level correlate more than race does.
Mhm.
Is the other thing that I heard you say. But it seems like there are probably some protective factors in the African American community and the Hispanic community that are protecting against death due to alcohol. So that would be, I think, probably a fascinating next area of research.
Absolutely. I would love to do something like that because in white middle class America, the focus is so on the nuclear family and not asking for help, and extended family members not living near you, or that you're not supposed to, or you don't grow up with a strong extended family network. And then where do you go for help when you're
Mhm.
in having a meltdown because your kid is screaming and you've got
Yeah.
work things at work due, right? So
Yeah. And I think too, though, that there's been a lot of research done around a concept of weathering,
yes.
meaning that for Black and Hispanic and Native American people of color, that the impacts of racism uh, really sort of provide this wear and tear on your body over time. It's like water dripping on stone, just sort of wearing it down, and
Mhm.
that's the effect of these microaggressions over time. But that they specifically looked at Dr. Geronimus, who's famous for doing this weathering research, looked at Hispanic communities that were more recent immigrants to this country who had stronger familial networks, and found that that was a protective factor. So I think what you're alluding to maybe is that for some groups who have stronger uh, familial bonds or community bonds or maybe religious bonds, that might be a protective factor. But I think it would be interesting to really kind of tease it out um, by ethnicity, by socioeconomics, etc. So
Yeah, and you
um
did mention religion, and in
mhm,
my research, I have found in others that people who are Catholic, for example, drink less, and the
mhm,
more you are involved in, going to church, less alcohol use as well. So,
yeah. So, I always like to make sure that our listeners, if a particular topic pertains to them or a family member, um, and they think that, hey, maybe perhaps my drinking might fall into this category. What do I do? What would you say are some immediate options that people might be able to take advantage of if they're concerned about
yeah,
their level of drinking?
yeah, I think unfortunately, as you mentioned, our healthcare system is not a guarantee for help, especially when it comes to using substances and mental health and things like that. I think trusting your own instincts about your own drinking and those around you can be really helpful, and try, as opposed to like trying to count their number of drinks and putting them up against some kind of, guidelines. Instead, looking at the way that you're feeling, the way they're feeling, the family situation, things like that. I'm not sure that most, you could tell me about the training that most like primary care doctors get if someone should present and say, I think I'm drinking too much. I mean, their options are AA or rehab. What is that?
So Alcoholics Anonymous, so AA.org is a great place to start. There's also recently the 988 number that has been implemented as an emergency number for people with mental health and substance use concerns. And so dialing 988, talking to somebody about where in your specific area are resources. And then also, lastly, you mentioned your primary care doctor. Another great resource rather for having that conversation, helping you figure out, is my alcohol consumption harming my body in ways that I might not yet feel? There are tests that can be done. And also that doctor might be able to put you in touch with resources around helping you to cut down or eliminate drinking altogether. So.
Yeah, you mentioned cutting down. So there's a moderation movement underway, and I think there are lots of TikTokers and Facebook groups, moderation management, sober sisters, like people who just are interested in reducing their alcohol consumption, or kind of the harm reduction way of dealing with alcohol, as opposed to you're just never going to drink again, which I think is very scary for some people.
Yes. Exactly. And I think, social media has been providing ways for people to form communities around just about everything. So I think you're absolutely right in terms of that support, and people coming out and talking about their drinking on TikTok. I think that's been pretty huge. So, wow, I have a bunch more questions for you, but I think it's time to go to the audience and see what's in the chat. Hey, Wayne, are you there?
I'm here. I'm supportive. I'm going to ask all the supportive things. I want to thank the doctor for joining us this evening. So here we are. We're going to kick things off. Tracy Walls asks, does alcohol affect women differently, i.e. women who have given birth versus those who have never given birth?
Good question.
I don't know the answer to that question. I haven't heard anything along those lines.
Well, I think you also mentioned, I don't think that that whether you've given birth or not makes a difference, but I think earlier you mentioned that your body's ability to process alcohol also depends on your hormonal levels at the time. So the time in your cycle when you are ingesting alcohol.
Okay.
Yeah, correct.
Valerie Spalding Parker comes in and says, what about wine versus hard liquor? Have you seen any difference? One, how it affects the body, and what women drink. I guess what women drink more.
Women drink, their drink of choice is wine. So if you asked a sample of women, what's your go-to? 2/3 of them would say wine.
Okay.
But I don't know if the kind of alcohol matters.
Dr. Mel, have you heard English?
I think most of the studies have been done around wine, and there are not as many studies as you mentioned before on the effects of different kinds of alcohol in women versus men. The studies on wine sort of differentiate between white wine and red wine, and there's a question about whether the resveratrol, which is found in the skin of the grape, actually has some protective effect. and in small quantities. I think that's important to mention. But I think most of the research has been done around wine versus other harder liquors. But keep in mind that there's if you just look at the alcohol content, that if you have a small amount of tequila or scotch or um, bourbon as hard liquors, that there is a correlation based upon the amount of alcohol that you have. The alcohol content of the drink is what you can compare across, whether it's hard liquor or wine.
Okay. We also have a question. What about the breakdown on underage drinking?
I can speak to generational differences in drinking. So this increase in alcohol consumption has occurred among older women at midlife and beyond. Younger generations like Gen Z, they're drinking less alcohol than my generation did at their age. They're doing a lot of things less. They're having sex less, they're driving less, and they're drinking less alcohol too. And so,
what about weed though?
oh, that I
They-
don't know.
Yeah.
So they're watching more video games and videos, and
Yeah.
they seem more interested in computers than
Yeah.
alcohol and sex. Yeah.
And driving. You said
And driving.
driving too.
And driving.
Yeah.
How do you think men can help curb women's? Has there been any study on whether men helping not drinking or talking? How can men give a hand?
Yeah, so that's really important because women are often in relationships, and it's interesting because women's drinking tends to match that of their partner. So if their husband drinks a lot, then they will drink more than the average woman who doesn't have a husband who might drink a lot. I think that that shame is bad. Like trying to say, oh, you're an awful person. How could you do this? What about the kids? Like, I don't think that's helpful as much as, being a support person. Like, what can I do? It sounds like you want to reduce your drinking. How can I help you with that?
I guess one thing is men have to realize if they're over drinking themselves. So if you have a problem, you're not necessarily going to want to help your partner because you don't realize you don't think they have a problem, and you don't realize your own problem.
Right.
Right. And sometimes for women, they'll be feeling like they're drinking too much, but the people all around them, they don't see a problem with it because they're all drinkers too.
Mm-hmm.
Birds of a feather. Is that the birds of a feather comment? So we have another question. This is from, I can't pronounce the name. I'm sorry. I can't pronounce the name. What about women who have had an alcoholic family member? Do they seem to drink more?
Yes, studies do show that there is a genetic predisposition toward drinking if you have a family member with that, in your history. But also if it can be a socialization process as well. So if your parents are heavy drinkers, then you'd be more likely to be a heavy drinker as well. But even if they're not, I mean, you might want to ask if you're, about your parents, it was my grandfather a drinker, and, try to get into some of those family secrets sometimes that people keep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's important too. I mean, health histories of your family, and like you said, generations before us sometimes are not the sort of the code around what's private was much higher bar than it is for subsequent generations. And when you ask, it might be to ask, and so that you say, I really want this information so it can help me out. So not trying to violate anybody's privacy, but trying to understand my own self and what I might be at risk for.
Right.
Agreed.
I think that's important. So we have a question that I'm going to ask anyway from Mario James Frazier. Does weight play a part in becoming inebriated? I know what you're going to say. I know what I think. And if so, what is the recommended consumption weight based on weight? They won't have a recommended consumption rate, Mario. They're not going to answer that question, but I asked it just to say your name. But for men versus women, go ahead.
Thank you, Mario, for the question. But go ahead, Dr. Stewart.
Oh gosh, well, I think in general, smaller people should consume smaller amounts of alcohol. I wouldn't want to see a 110-pound woman, drinking 5 beers, that maybe a 250-pound man would be drinking. I think it would probably have a different effect on her than him.
Right. But also too, I mean, I think regardless of weight, there's a recommended number of recommended drinks that you not exceed per day. And I think it's 5 ounces is considered a standard drink. So 1 to 2 for women and 2 to 3 for men. Typically are the recommendations. I don't think it's done per se by weight. But either way, that the potential effects on your body that Dr. Stewart ran down, the more alcohol that you're exposed to, the higher your risk for liver disease, for cancers, for heart disease, for rapid heart rate. A lot of people I know as they age become more susceptible to that rapid heart rate. And when they do drink, disruptions in sleep, we talked about that before, and also weight gain. So if you're already overweight, drinking more because you think that you can handle it probably isn't going to help either.
And if you have a big belly, doesn't mean you have more enzymes in the big belly. Just doesn't work that way. Your body's a fine-tuned machine at any weight.
Wayne, you stayed at a Holiday Inn last night, right?
I stayed at a Holiday Inn last night. But I just don't think, I mean, I had a big belly. It didn't affect whether I could bring down alcohol. I mean, just didn't. If you, another question, if you drink at dinner for 4 to 6 ounces a day, is that a problem? A drink at dinner, 4 to 6 ounces a day, is that a problem?
I don't think that would typically be viewed as a problem.
Yeah. And again, we kind of talked about defining sort of, is it impairing you in some way? If it's affecting your sleep, then yeah. If it is causing you to have heartburn when you get ready to go to bed, then yeah, that's a problem. So you have to sort of look at how it's affecting you in your life. I think there are a number of studies that show, like I said, 5 ounces is considered standard. That 1 drink a day, doesn't cause major problems. But then there are also other studies that show that no amount of alcohol is safe. So again, you kind of have to decide based upon the effect that it's having on you, your function, and your health.
There we go. And there you have it.
Yeah. So
Dr.
any other questions?
That's it, Dr. Mel.
All right. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Stewart. This was really informative. I think a lot of us, have seen the trends with the marketing to women and wondered, is this really good? And I think we've kind of answered it tonight, that it's not. And that we need to be concerned about our health and the health effects of how alcohol is affecting us in our lives. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, of course, Wayne, for bringing the word from the street and for being supportive and wearing your supportive hoodie. We appreciate that. Yeah, for those good questions. And then, of course, before I go, I want you all to remember that you, just by listening to this show, are eligible to to participate in a special research study that's being conducted by Howard University. They've asked me to invite people that listen to the show to participate in the COVID resilience research study. Participation is voluntary, but if you just fill out 2 surveys, it takes about 15 to 25 minutes. If you fill out those 2 surveys, you can be compensated $100 just for doing that. So if you have any interest, please reach out to Dana Harvey, and her email is danaharveyresearch@gmail.com. That's Dana, D-A-N-A, Harvey, H-A-R-V-E-Y, research@gmail.com. Well, that is it for us. Thank you so much for joining us again tonight on Excuse Me, Doctor. Thank you again to my guest, Dr. Susan Stewart. Thank you to the audience for those fantastic questions. And until I see you, have a powerful week and be wise, be well, and be health empowered.
So I guess I should thank the Robinsons. They invited me. They still don't know. I hooked up with Dave 3 days ago. He'll start coughing tomorrow. And I bet in 10 days he'll be on a ventilator. Now his wife, she's not vaccinated because she thinks it'll prevent her from being pregnant. But what they don't know is that I can decrease sperm count. Sorry, Dave. Good luck with that.